your email address and I'll send it to his people.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Illinois Green Party series. I'm sorry, I got distracted there. Happy Halloween. Let me try again. I'm your host, David Rych. We have a recurring guest here, a very special guest, and I'm very excited about tonight. Matthew Hoh, who is the Green Party candidate for Senator in North Carolina, as you can see right there. Matthew, thanks for coming back on the show.
Hey, thanks, David. Appreciate it, man. Happy Halloween.
Thank you. You as well. I got my Robin Hood hat on. This is my costume. Robin Hood was my very first hero.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes a lot of sense in retrospect, like looking at my love for justice and that sort of stuff. Like my whole life, I've just always been about like justice. Like I never understood unfairness, and I never got it.
I hear that. And, you know, it actually is something that when you start getting help for post-traumatic stress disorder and moral injury and some other mental health stuff, depression, anxiety, you know, when you're combat veteran going into the VA, sure. And they bring you this idea of like a just world and how like you were having problems handling the fact that it's not a just world. And you're like, I'm a 40-year-old man. What do you mean I'm having problems not handling that it's a just world? And that's the reality of it. That's a lot of it. You know, we live our lives thinking that we are going to be people with white hats on, or that things are going to be fair or just, or these institutions that were built up that, you know, we mythologized and we were told narratives about and tales, and whether it's our election system or whether it's our police departments or our military or whatever, you know, the president of the United States is supposed to be right. You know, I mean, but me too, though, with Robin Hood. I'm sure when we were just saying we're a few years age difference, and
just a couple,
yeah. And I remember as a kid going to see the Disney Robin Hood, right?
With the fox,
with the fox and everything else, and I mean, so Little John is a big bear and everything,
exactly.
And then of course, when we were growing up, you still had the black and white films on television.
Absolutely.
So I remember, I remember seeing Errol Flynn as Robin Hood. Yeah,
I saw that probably 40 plus times. I mean, I just watched it over, and I wrote like little book reports and stuff on Robin Hood, as you know, in my youth. And you know, taking from the rich to give to the poor, I thought was a perfectly morally acceptable thing to me. So you know, so here we are.
So, I mean, they don't have the idea of like holding up some rich dudes in a wagon in the middle of the woods so that people can eat. Completely down with that, you know.
100%. All right, cool. All right, well, speaking of justice, let's talk about your campaign. We got 8 days till the election, a week from tomorrow. Wow,
right.
Easy,
huh?
Yeah,
one week and a wake up, as we used to say in the Marine Corps. Yeah.
That's right. And you got on the ballot in North Carolina as a Green Party candidate, which is, especially at the level of like federal senator, is damn near unheard of. Not completely, but it's very difficult for third party candidates to get on the ballots. Local elections, it's easy because you usually don't run under a party flag. But when you start getting up there in like state and federal level, it becomes very difficult, mostly because the two major political parties are running the show.
Right.
And they will just sort of give you any sort of tally of signatures for ballot access that they want to give you. And I know that in Illinois a few years ago, before I was a Green Party member, I was a libertarian, and they asked me to run. They make some good points, but not a lot. And it was like, and that was even like a lot less than what you normally had to get. I only had to get like 1,200 signatures because of the pandemic, and I still couldn't do it. It's a harder thing to think. We were able to do it electronically. We're like, oh, cool, easy peasy. Nope. I think I got like 20 signatures electronically.
Right. Yeah.
So I still didn't make it. But if it wasn't that for the pandemic, I think it would have been somewhere in the thousands of signatures that I would have to have gotten face to face from the signature people on the streets. You know, that had to be a physical signature kind of thing. And it's absurd because the Democratic and Republican candidates have to get far less than that. And they already have the notoriety and the money to do that quite easily. So congratulations for getting on the ballot. If you want to talk about like how that process went.
Sure. Yeah, because it was a big deal for us. So we got on the ballot as a party, the North Carolina Green Party. So I didn't do it as a candidate. We did it as a party. Although the requirement would have been the same if I was, well, that's not true. For whatever reason, as everyone knows, right, every state's different in terms of their ballot access, just like they are for all kinds of stuff. And for some reason, North Carolina hates independents more than it does political parties, minor parties. So running as a party to get on the ballot, we needed 14,000, a little less than 14,000 signatures to get a ballot line for the state. If I had been running as an independent, I would have needed 83,000 signatures, which is, unless you're Michael Bloomberg, and you have that type of cash, I don't know how it's possible, because getting 14,000 signatures was difficult. Once we got our plan in place and we had our people out there, it was accessible. We were able to get it done, but we needed, it was a statewide effort. We needed a statewide campaign like mine to kind of get people interested, to kind of, tie everything together through a campaign. But it also cost us a lot of money, because in order for us to do it, we had to pay our people to be out there. You know what you said, David, about it's harder than you think. Absolutely. I mean, this is my first time being a candidate, and my thoughts were, yeah, okay, like you. Oh, we'll just go out. We'll get a bunch of clipboards. We'll get some volunteers. We'll go to the farmer's market. How hard can it be? It's really hard. That's just collecting the signatures, then making sure you've got signatures that count. And again, every state is different. But if you go and look at, like, Ballotpedia does good work on this. They collect data on this. If you look at Ballotpedia reports, nationwide, for every 4 signatures you collect, only 3 count. Right. So you're always going into it having to have like a surplus, having to have some type of difference, some delta, to make sure you're going to make it. And in North Carolina, the requirements are a little bit harder than other places. So in North Carolina, it's probably more like 60 or 65% is the average for verification. So if it says 14,000 signatures, well, you better collect 19 or 20,000 signatures. And we collected 22,500. What happened then was, when we went to the State Board of Elections, and the State Board of Elections is controlled by 3 Democrats and State Board of Elections is controlled by Democrats because we have a Democratic governor. And the actual board of the State Board of Elections is 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. We went in, we turned in our signatures. We had done everything correctly, met all the deadlines, satisfied all the requirements, clearly passed the threshold for the number of signatures we needed. And on the very last day that the state had to certify us, they declined to certify us as a party because they said they had questions about our petitioning process. They never provided any evidence. They never allowed us any due diligence. They never provided any type of legal justification for denying us certification. They did this on June 30th, and July 1st was the deadline to be a candidate. That was the deadline for certification of candidates. So we then had to sue, and we had a great lawyer, a guy named Oliver Hall with the Center for Competitive Democracy, who's working on a case in Illinois right now. I'm not really too sure about the details of it, but I think fairly similar in terms of signature collection. And we had to sue him. We had to go to federal court. And we won in federal court. And then the Democratic Party, which had joined our lawsuit because our lawsuit was against the State Board of Elections, the Democratic Party really showed its hand and signed on as a co-defendant. And they were granted that. And so when we won in federal court and district court, the Democratic Party, and to be specific, the DSCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, so Chuck Schumer's outfit, which was a bit flattering, David, because as soon as we got our signatures in, the DSCC got involved. So they were clearly threatened by our campaign, and more so by the issues that we were going to represent, Medicare for all, rent control, ending the war on drugs, right, living wages, that kind of thing. So we ended up, the Democratic Party appealed, and then we won in federal appeals court. At the same time, the North Carolina Democratic Party had filed lawsuit against us, or against the state to be specific, but they named us as a co-defendant in state court. And after we won in federal appeals court, it was clear they were not going to win in state court. So we won that as well by them dropping the suit. But that was, and I've left out about 3 hours worth of stuff, including how the Democratic Party was down here, the DSCC, with the Elias Law Group, which is Mark Elias's law firm, who is well known for being involved in voter suppression and party suppression and ballot access shenanigans, if you will, for decades. And he is arguably the most prominent or important Democratic Party attorney in the country. And they were involved down here trying to get just one example of what they did. They did a lot of things, but they went to people who had signed our petitions and they said they were with the Green Party, or they said they were with the State Board of Elections, or they said they were at the Secretary of State's office, and they asked them to remove their names from the petitions.
What?
And yeah, I mean, that's what happened. I mean, it was a whole thing where we found out about it because our supporters started calling us. This is mid-June or so, maybe third week of June. We start getting phone calls from people who signed our petition saying, hey, how come you guys are calling me, asking me to take my name off of your petition? And we said, what are you talking about? And turns out that it was the Democratic Party calling people and saying, hi, I'm so-and-so with the Green Party. We'd like you to remove your name from our petition. And people did. People were confused about it. Not a lot of people did, a handful, but a lot of people were let us know. And so actually what happened, our party co-chair here in North Carolina, a few of us, another one of our party members as well, were prepared for it because they were calling all of us. I was getting calls and, and they were able to tape that conversation where they said, I'm with the Green Party. And then they started showing up at people's houses, asking them to remove their names from petitions. So they canvassed, they went door to door, went to people's homes and asked them to remove their names from the petition. And what they did here was this is when they would identify themselves as from the State Board of Elections or the Secretary of State's office. So they would go to someone's home who signed our petition and they would say, this is the Democratic Party would do this. They would say, we are investigating fraud that the Green Party committed while getting this petition done. Would you like your name to be removed from it? I'm with the State Board of Elections. I'm with the Secretary of State's office. Right. I mean, so
that itself be fraud?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Wouldn't that itself be fraud?
It is fraud, right? Exactly. I mean, one, they're not just fraudulently, they're not just misrepresenting themselves. They are impersonating a state official, but then also two, they're also lying about it, right? By saying that we committed fraud, which we didn't do. And I mean, this whole thing went on for months. It really cost us because we weren't free and clear, like in the sense that we are on the ballot and we are good until the third week of August. So we lost about we finished our petitioning on May 17th and that was about August 20th, August 21st when we were finally out of the courtrooms. I mean, so that was roughly almost 3 months that we lost fighting this. We got some good media out of it. We got some fundraising out of it, but it was 3 months that we really couldn't campaign because we were just focused on that. And so I think they had two objectives, the Democratic Party. One was to try and keep us off the ballot. Hit us with this nonsense to the State Board of Elections that they had to do an investigation, make us miss our deadline because of that. And then I think they didn't think we had it together enough to have an attorney who was going to file such a kick-ass lawsuit, in federal court and win. But the branch of that was, the branch plan of that was, or the supplement to that was, well, we'll just delay them. And they did. And that did affect us quite a bit. And there's a lot we can go into that. It was about what you expected. It's what other people around the country, you talk to a guy like Howie Hawkins, he's got all kinds of story like that. Just talking to Randy Credico, who ran for New York governor, back in 2014 or something like that. Same kind of stories, and there was collusion with the governor's office. And this, I mean, it was real dirty. It was everything that it was all, it validated why we're doing this, David, right? It completely validated that the two-party system is corrupt, undemocratic, and it's harmful, and they clearly showed that.
And you mentioned these two phrases in sequence, that voter suppression and party suppression. Yeah. Party suppression is voter suppression, and voter suppression is a form of oppression, political oppression.
Right.
To keep people out of the democratic process is hugely problematic. And I just recently saw this, so hopefully I'll get the numbers right. It was somewhere in the 30%. Okay, so the Democratic Party has like 40% of 40 some odd percent of the voting population, and then the Republican Party and the people who don't identify with either were in the 30%, but they were exactly the same number. I don't remember, like 33 or 34, whatever it was. Meaning that as far as like the tally of the distribution of voters in the country, the people who don't align with either of the parties is equal to one of the two major parties. And that is a huge amount of people who don't identify as either Democrat or Republican, at least not on paper. And and yet they have no representation. And that's also not okay. And it's big enough where I think it warrants a lot more attention on the issue, especially on the federal and state levels, that something needs to be done about this. It really shocks me. Well, I shouldn't say it shocks me. It appalls and offends me that the courts aren't like all over this.
Yeah, I mean, the deference of the court shows, and it's dangerous, right? Because we have that lawsuit, we have that the Supreme Court's going to look at Harper versus Moore, which is a legal case that comes out of North Carolina with the independent state legislature theory, which has been discredited for centuries, but they're reviving it. And the Alito court certainly is sympathetic to those kind of things. And that's very dangerous because that basically says that at least in federal elections, the courts have no say or very limited say because the Constitution, according to this theory, gives all that power to the state legislatures. So that judicial review doesn't apply because the Constitution says that the states are the ones that control the elections, or the state legislatures are the ones that control the elections, which again has been something that no one has agreed to in centuries, and they're bringing this up. And with the Alito court, of course, the danger is they'll go with it. We here in North Carolina, David, we are one of, I think, 12 states where we have more unaffiliated voters than Democrats and Republicans. So it's something like 35% or 36% of our voters are unaffiliated, and the Democrats then have a little more than the Republicans do. But it's been trending that way for years, and it's clear that that's where it's going. It's not going to plateau. It's just going to continue to expand with unaffiliated voters. And here in North Carolina, Common Cause has filed a lawsuit because, going back to the State Board of Elections, the way it's set up is that you have this board, 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. If there's a Republican governor, it's 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And Common Cause is saying, wait, this isn't right, because the biggest chunk of voters are unaffiliated voters and we're not represented. I mean, and that was the real danger that we had in our situation, our circumstances, the precedent that could have been set, because what was happening basically was that the Democratic Party, through its appointed members on the State Board of Elections, was saying, we don't like the fact that the Green Party got on the ballot. We're not going to address whether they did it correctly or not. We're going to ignore all that. We're just going to say we have questions and we're not going to allow them on. And that's what we were up against. And I had a friend overseas who said to me, when I was explaining this to him, he said, hang on a second. You're telling me that in the States, the way it works is that the party in power gets to pick who its opposition is.
Yes.
And that's essentially the case, right?
Yes.
And we have a system nationwide where it's roughly evenly split between the Republicans and Democrats. It may not be that in demographics. It may not be that in voter registration. It may not be that in the popular vote for the president, say, or something like that. But in terms of the balance of power, the Republicans and Democrats do a great job of taking turns being in control of Congress, of taking turns in the White House. And then you see the governorships and the state legislatures are roughly split. The Republicans have more, but the Democrats have more of the bigger states, I guess, in New York, California, that kind of thing. So it is a deliberate structuring of the electoral system to ensure that the 2 parties stay in power. That's the essence of the duopoly. And of course, they have all that money supporting them, all the big money donors that benefit from that structure. And so, yeah, the edifice that we're up against, the edifice we're up against is very real. And it is something that we have to take very seriously, because it's not anything that's going to come down because we are morally correct. Right. We're up against something that is very real, very strong, and we have to find the best ways to fight it asymmetrically, to crack it open and bring it down.
Right. And then I appreciate you bringing up morality, too, because remember, I have bumper stickers made for this. This was one of my mottos on my radio show, is that morality always trumps the law. Remember that. Always. We're each and all born with the capacity for reason and free will, which makes us moral agents. And so by design, by your very nature, you're a moral agent. You're not a legal agent. That's a artificial bunch of nonsense.
Right.
So morality.
And getting back to what you brought up to begin with Robin Hood and justice, we have a fallacy in this country, and maybe throughout the West, but certainly in the United States, where justice is equal to law. and law is equal to justice. And we all know that just because something is the law does not mean it is just, right? And certainly our history is full of that.
Legal doesn't mean moral. Illegal doesn't mean immoral. To be a runaway slave was illegal. It was a perfectly moral activity. Rosa Parks sitting in the front of the bus was illegal. It was literally illegal. The cop arrested her, said, I have to enforce the segregation laws. Well, first of all, you don't have to. Okay, even cops are still moral agents. That's another problem. There is like, some legislator told you get to like beat the hell out of somebody because they don't want to sit on the ground because they're not a dog.
That's the triumph of Nuremberg, right? The Nuremberg proceedings is that it clearly establishes, and then it's put into the UN Charter, to which we are a signatory, that natural law or moral law trumps everything. Because the murder of 9 million people in the Holocaust was legal, and that was
government sanctioned.
That was their defense. What they were doing was legal. This is legal. We weren't just following orders, but we were following the law.
Right.
And I mean, in Nuremberg, they said no, natural law. And I mean, that goes back. We get talk about the Greeks, and all that stuff, right? But it certainly is. And I think that's something that we forget too much in this country, is that there is something more that even our Constitution is superseded by natural law, moral authority, right? The idea of justice, the idea of right, those things that, because certainly our Constitution was anything but just when it made people 3/5, right?
I just found like in the last, I think it was like 4 years ago, I was doing research for about one of my radio shows, and I came across, I'd never heard that before, because they hide all sorts of stuff. I'm like, excuse me. I'm like, and it's in one of the articles. It wasn't like even like an amendment that came later. It's like in the foundation.
The Great Compromise. Yeah.
Kidding me. I'm like, wow. I know. Then the 13th Amendment comes along and supposedly eradicates that. Then of course, the first sentence frees the slaves. I like it. It's fascinating to me too that like we have to get permission from somebody else to be a free person. Like that just blows me away. The Constitution is a piece of parchment with ink on it. Okay. You've heard the divine right of kings. Okay. Yeah. Do you think there was an actual divine entity that bequeaths divine rights to these kings and queens? No, of course not. But they duped all the people to believe that there was, and they acted as if it was true. Same thing with the magical powers of the Constitution. It's a piece of parchment with ink on it. Okay. Right. All morality, all virtues, all values are what in logic is called a priori. It's in you. You get to them by contemplation. You don't get to it through external experience. Okay. I'm getting way too philosophical, but anyway, so very cool. How is the campaign going now? Again, we got what did you say? 7 days and what's
7 days and a wake up, right? So it's today's Monday night, and a week from tomorrow is election day. But for us in North Carolina, our early voting started on the 22nd, the 23rd. It started 2 Thursdays ago. Okay. So we have one more week of one more week through Saturday of early voting, and then no voting on Sunday and Monday, and then election day. And I think as of the other day, about 25% of the people that cast their ballots. So people do participate in early voting here. And it's the right way to do it, of course. I mean, this idea, like we were just saying, holding on to something sacrosanct, that is just because the way they did it 250 years ago, that they wrote it on a piece of paper with a quill pen, right? That we're going to have it on Tuesday, on the second Tuesday of the month, and blah, 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 blah. That's got to do with harvests and the distance people had to travel to church and, everything else. That's why it's set that way. And that we can't do it in a way that makes sense or is fair or allows more people to vote, right? Because that's the way we used to do it. I'm a big Thomas Paine fan, and like what Thomas Paine said was, right, the government is for the living, not for the dead. And we have way too much of that, right? Where we respect to the point of it's a form of religion for us. And again, getting back to the Alito court, the way Alito approaches it, as if these men who created these laws were some type of, you're saying, divinity, that they were transmuting some higher power through their hands onto the quill, onto the parchment. It wasn't even paper, right? It was parchment, right. I mean, it's so long ago. So, but that kind of thing. And you do have people, including, the most arguably the most important person on the court right now, Alito, in the sense of like that defines his interpretation, that defines his construction and deconstruction of his legal opinions. I mean, and that defines what he wants to see happen in this nation. Yeah, it's really scary, man. It really is. I mean, that
it's
we
very
have
scary. And so what you're referring to is called originalism.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a legal philosophy or political philosophy concerning how to approach the interpretation of the Constitution. Right. And I don't know what other types of approaches would be called, honestly, but I do know that because this is all over the place. And basically, like you said, it's almost like treating the Bible as if every word of it is infallible, perfect, and morally good. Which, of course, if you read some of that, that's obviously not the case.
Right.
Okay, but it's the same sort of thing applied to the founding fathers. And as you said, like somehow they couldn't make a mistake or something, or even if they did, whatever, even if it's wrong, we have to obey it anyway because they set it up this way. Well, no, we don't have to. That's just silliness. It's all letter of the law and very little spirit of the law. What is the 14th Amendment talks about? What is it? Is the 14th Amendment talks about that says that there are many other rights that we can't even put in here?
The ninth Amendment. Yeah, that's my. I know that because that's my favorite amendment. Right, and because it says that this document doesn't contain, which completely makes the Alito argument in Dobbs about abortion makes it completely upends it. Right, because you do have the Ninth Amendment that says this document, that what is written in this document is not the be all and end all.
That the document itself says that.
Exactly. That's the whole Ninth Amendment. Right. Exactly. Like that there's other things out there that aren't named that are also rights. And so it drives me crazy. I'm feeling it drives you crazy.
Oh,
and more importantly, it's really dangerous. I mean, and where that's going to go then, right? Where is it going to go? I mean, in terms of, he's already, Alito's alluded to it, and certainly the Federalist Society and others, and those, what's the name of the road? There's a Catholic group that's very much involved in this kind of stuff, and I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. But they're already have very clearly said that this is just the start of the process. Dobbs opens it up for us to get rid of all kinds of things like gay marriage, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's just, I was just watching a snippet of that Prager guy, the conservative weirdo.
Yeah.
Okay. So talking about rights and how, they're not fully, expressed in the Constitution, and the difficulty of interpreting or defining rights and that kind of thing. Look, I took plenty of ethics classes and rights, and I've researched this online. I think any legitimate source you would go to would define a right as a moral allowance for behavior. A right is a right because it's right. Right. You don't have the right to do or be wrong. You have the ability to. You don't have the right to. Everybody has the ability to murder. Nobody has the right to do so, and so on and so forth. If you want to get super philosophical, you have the right to everything that is good. That's the moral underpinning of rights. Mm-hmm. Okay, now of course we have to have many discussions on what counts as good, but we can start with health.
Right.
Health's a good. I don't think anybody's going to argue against that. Therefore, you have all the, society, I think, is then obligated to construct industries, market systems, whatever, logistics that provide health to people, all of them.
Right. Well, there's also the antithesis to of that, where the money making comes into, because not only is, say, healthcare a right, or why is it a right? Because it's a necessity. Right. I mean, you can argue it different ways, right? How you arrive at that definition of what it is. And the same with housing, and the same with education, the same with food and jobs. Those are all necessities, and they are all rights. I believe those are all human rights.
They make people better.
Exactly. And if you come at it from a neoliberal perspective, from a capitalist perspective, from financialization perspective, then those are the things that you want to make sure we are putting in as people's overhead, right? So if you look at what's really that's dragging people down, that's keeping people back, that's forcing families just to have incredibly hard times, it's those things what we're talking about. Right. It's the overhead costs of healthcare, housing, education, food, and also too, jobs aren't a cost, but certainly when you're paid a suppressed wage, that is a cost. That is a form of overhead because you're not nearly making as much because your employer is keeping more than he or she should be allowed to. You're not receiving the full value of your labor. So that is an overhead cost as well when you are getting paid $10 an hour when you need to make $19 an hour to live. Right. I mean, so you see that as well, that the juxtaposition of that, or the corollary of that, or the counterposition to that is that if these things are right, well, that's a heck of a good way to make money from people. Right. And that's what really dominates, families right now, and always has and always will, is this overhead costs of these things that are our rights. And, that's the imperative, I think, of addressing them as rights and making sure people have them, right, without cost, without the ability to pay. Everyone has equal access and the ability to have healthcare, housing, food, jobs, and education. But certainly it is. I mean, there's a side to it when we address rights that we have to understand. The other side in this argument, Wall Street and the Democrats and Republicans and others see that as a great money-making opportunity because people can't live without those things.
Absolutely. And this, I'm going to use this as a segue to something else, more specific issue in your state.
And I realize I didn't even ask you about, I didn't even answer you about how the campaign's going. The campaign's going well.
Good. No, so I mean, a long time ago, I'm probably 20 or some odd years ago, I had this notion that maybe everybody should just get a base pay. And just and there's, you could get rid of poverty and, that kind of thing. And then, you work, whatever you make after that is your own business. And then Andrew Yang, when he was running or in the primary, at least, mentioned UBI. And I'm like, oh, right. Beautiful. Okay. Is UBI an issue out there? Is it something that's talked about?
No, I've not heard anyone speak about too much. It comes up in conversations like this. Okay. And certainly, it's an idea that has merit to it. I tend to come down on the side of arguing for a federal jobs guarantee for full employment, right? And pay people living wages, and you don't have to then worry about a universal basic income. I mean, certainly you're gonna have a safety net to make sure, and, certainly we have to pay people more for disability, and we have to, Social Security actually has to be something people can live off of. That kind of things all included in that. But that's where I am. I personally believe in the jobs guarantee more than a UBI, but I'm not opposed to UBI. I do think that there are aspects of UBI that could be inflationary.
As well, and that's a criticism for sure.
And then my thing as well with living wages and jobs guarantees, if this is the economic inequality and everybody gets UBI, it just shifts everything like this, right? That's how I kind of view it. While if you have a jobs guarantee and paying people a living wage, hopefully you see this happening with economic inequality. But again, I can be convinced on it. And I like this. I like the fact that there are communities and states and nations that are experimenting with it.
Yeah,
and I think it's important to do that.
California, I believe, that have done it. I know that there's some in Canada. And as far as I understand, it's been a while since I've checked into it, but last time I did, it seemed to be going very well. But these are smaller communities, and logistically, things happen much differently on smaller scales than they do on bigger scales. That's
right. For sure. It's got it. Whatever happens, it has to all be tied into a larger economic package. Something in the Green Party we refer to as the Economic Bill of Rights that ties everything together. Because if you do bring people's healthcare costs, their housing costs, their education costs, first of all, if you get rid of education and healthcare costs, like we propose, we all pay for it collectively through our taxes, basically, and then your housing costs are reasonable, then you don't have that overhead, and and then you see the value of a UBI, because that does, as you kind of said, David, that allows you that surplus money to do what you want with, for you to be able to afford to go to school and live off of your UBI. It gives you the ability to start a new job or a career, or, open up that guitar store you always wanted to open up, or whatever it is, Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. I think one of the arguments I want to move on from UBI, but real quick, one of the arguments for it is this notion that there's so much that some individuals do in our society that are beneficial to labor forces. Like, for example, women have babies. They literally call that labor.
Yeah.
But they don't get paid for it. They get no sort of stipend for it. In fact, they have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to raise this child to become
Right.
a working member of society. The UBI would tend to that. Like,
Right.
like we do see your contribution, and we're going to go ahead and give you some money for it, kind of thing. Now, okay, let's.
Yeah.
But we could talk about UBI later. The Green Party, where this is a Green Party show. You're a Green Party candidate. I'm a Green Party member, of course. So the Green Party is called the Green Party because it emphasizes the environment. And it's also we have our 10 platforms, and I don't know any other party that actually has 10 principles of which they base the rest of their stuff on.
Right.
So it's one of the things that attracted me to it in the first place, the fact that I agreed with all of them. I remember looking as a libertarian, I was very discontent with the Libertarian Party. Wow. And I was just looking around, and I was just like, check. I mean, these are all really good things. I don't disagree with any of them.
Right. Yep.
What are some of the environmental issues that are like on the ballot, if you will, this election? Anything?
Well, I would say there are no, I mean, in the sense of who's running to protect the environment and who takes climate change very seriously, there's nobody except for me and the two other Green Party candidates we have in the state, Josh Bradley, who's running for Raleigh City Council, and Michael Trudeau, who's running for State Senate Seat 16.
Wow.
Besides the three of us, there's really not. There's some Democrats who may be serious about it, but they're few and far between. And there are a bunch of Democrats who pay lip service to it. And then there's a bunch of Republican climate deniers, and then the Libertarians aren't very good about it. Though a lot of those, I mean, it's interesting dealing with the Libertarians because they're more or less, most of them are pretty smart men and women.
Absolutely.
And you can see where a lot of them have run into that problem of like, okay, I'm not going to deny that climate change is real. And what can we do about it then? I mean, if you take the libertarian model of you have to let the market handle it. Well, the market, man.
The market's what did it.
The market's what did it. And the market will continue to do it because the market believes that stranded assets, to continue kind of with our religious motif and everything, stranded assets are a sacrilege, right? That's a heresy. Every last drop of oil needs to come out of the ground. If you have anything that's a stranded asset, that is just completely antithetical to the principles of the market, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they will never do anything about it until every last drop of oil, every particle of gas has been monetized. I mean, and that's where we're heading. And that's going to be the death of our civilization and about what most of the species on Earth, because the great extinction is going underway. You don't hear, I mean, I can tell you, so you get a lot of, when you run for U.S. Senate, you get a number of candidate questionnaires. I don't know, we've probably filled out 10 or 12 of them from different places across the state. A couple have asked about climate. Most do not. Most do not have climate on their candidate questionnaires. You don't hear about it from people because circumstances are dire. But when I'm around the state, I hear about the same three things all the time: healthcare, housing, and drugs, because it's dire, because people can't get healthcare, they're losing their homes, or they can't afford homes, and they know people who are either in jail or dying from overdoses. I mean, so that's what I hear a lot. And then the other part of the environmental stuff, David, is not just the big picture climate collapse that we're experiencing and that's getting worse, but the fact that, man, I can't keep track of of where in this state people can't drink their water. I mean, it keeps happening over and over and over again. Communities can't drink their water because of poisoning, because of chemical poisoning, because of agricultural waste poisoning, because of military poisoning. I mean, whether it's chemical companies, the hog farms, the coal-fired power plants with their coal ash, the military bases leaking God knows what, the PFAS contamination that we're now really starting to understand. But I mean, there are throughout the state, in every part of the state, there are communities that can't drink their water. And I'm not being glib or flip or anything about where I can't keep up with it. I mean, it's almost impossible. When I say that to people, they agree. So we have this other aspect of the environment besides the climate, in a sense of just kind of like your more run-of-the-mill environmental concerns, that we are poisoning and toxifying our land and water and air, where we are destroying the ground, destroying the water, and we're killing people. People are dying. People are getting cancer and dying from these things. And both the Democrats and Republicans are in the pockets of the chemical companies. They're in the pockets of the hog farms, the agricultural production facilities. They're in the pockets of the military industrial complex. So they're not going to criticize Fort Bragg or Camp Lejeune or anything like that, Seymour Johnson Air Base, you know. So, yeah, I mean, it really is something where we are not just making the planet uninhabitable, which is going to destroy our societal and economic infrastructure, but we're literally poisoning our ground, water, and air so that we can't live regardless. Yeah.
Isn't it ridiculous? It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable to me that this is allowed to happen. Maya von Rossum? You know that name?
No, I don't think so.
She is the founder of the Delaware River Keepers and the Green Amendment for the Generations. She's a lawyer who goes around and tries to get a state an amendment in the state constitutions for the protection of the environment that makes like the environment a right. Yeah. Makes it a right. Here we go again. Makes it a right. I scribbled a lot of paper and poof, there it is. But it's already a right. You know, just certain people to acknowledge that. I've had her on the show twice. She's fabulous. In fact, I should probably connect you two because I think you
guys do.
Yeah, I absolutely will. Yeah. So I'll connect you with Maya. You can go ahead and connect me with Roger.
Do you know Pat? Do you know Pat Elder?
What's that?
Do you know Pat Elder?
I do not know that name.
Pat's with the Green Party. He's running for lieutenant governor in Maryland with Nancy Wallace is running for governor for the Greens in Maryland. But Pat is one of the authorities on this type of thing we're talking about, this poisoning of the ground with pollutants. Particularly, Pat really has a real good understanding and speaks out very much again about the PFAS, about the forever chemicals, right? That we keep putting into our water, you know, and that, but Pat Elder's a great guy about that.
Very cool. I'll have to reach out to him. I want to get more Green Party members from across the country, even across the world on this show. That'd be great. I had a gentleman who's not in the Green Party, but he's from Canada and a Canadian who was very interesting fellow to give it that perspective on things. So that's very cool. Yeah. So no. Okay. Yeah. The water thing is a huge issue. PFAS, also known as the forever chemical, by the way. I think that's probably a more popular term. I don't know. I know people who think of it, hear of it that way.
I like saying that because I'm always afraid someone's going to ask me what PFAS stands for, and there's no way I'm getting past poly. So
poly,
exactly.
But you know that there's several villages and cities in Illinois that are suing whomever. Yeah. A lot of lawsuits going on concerning that. And you're right, it leaches into our water system, and it's unbelievably.
And they're pulling fish out of the water that are completely contaminated with it. And you gotta, what was the thing a month or so ago where nowhere in the world is it now safe to drink rainwater because it's so heavily contaminated. Like remember growing up, we had acid rain, you know, and everything. And just, you know, this idea that what we're doing, not just to ourselves, but to all wildlife, to all of nature, to all living organisms. And this is, again, the great extinction that we're going through where, you know, it's just we couldn't have planned to do it this well, right? You know, we couldn't have sat down with a piece of paper and said, how are we going to wipe out most of life on Earth and accomplish it? No, we just did it by not caring, or I should say only caring about greed and only care about money. You know, that's how we did it.
Profit and very short-sighted, short-term reasoning, I think.
Yeah.
There's a clip, and I need to find it. It's a scientist from the 1950s, literally like 56, 57, who was talking about, he's like, there's even evidence that the pollutants we're putting in the air is changing the climate of the Earth.
Right. Yeah.
This is 1950s. So these people can't tell me that they didn't know or never heard that there's something going on when they started putting DDT everywhere and all sorts of other chemicals and crap. Yes, you did know. And go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh no, I was going to say there's a newspaper clip from 100 years ago where they talk about that, about how you know, the amount of factory produced smoke going into the air, that kind of thing was changing the environment. So even 100 years ago, they had an understanding. I mean, exactly what's happening now? No, but they had an understanding that what we were putting into the air would have a consequence for the chemistry of everything.
Right.
That we were changing things.
There are some literature concerning the age of the founding fathers and some of the higher ups there, Thomas Jefferson and so on, complaining about sewage going into rivers and creeks and stuff like that, and how it's causing toxicity amongst people and getting people sick. So there was a sort of issue like that back then
Right.
as well. I know in ancient Greece, I can't remember, but some philosopher said we need to stop developing. Okay, we were just tearing down nature. This has got to stop. This is what, 2,500 years ago. Okay, so this, pollution is not a recent thing or a recent concern by any stretch. Okay, we just have gone to like every possible thing to talk about, which is great. It's a very fruitful conversation. But I want to know more about this. Show is supposed to be about you right now, not about my own moral rants.
So no, I'm enjoying it though. So
okay, cool. Well, good. As am I. But you said the campaign is going well. What kind of like not, I want to say pushback, but like who's saying what to you about like your campaign? Are people excited about it? Or are they like third party? Give me a break.
No. So what we've done, we did this in the spring as well. Now in the fall is we go out to events, we go to festivals, we go to, what have you. We go where the people are. I mean, we're a small party here. We're growing. We don't have a very big network or foundation or infrastructure. So we're growing. So we get out to where the people are and meet people there. And we are met with a great degree of enthusiasm. They like the idea of there being more choices. They like the idea that there's a party that's for working people, that is for ending the war on drugs. I mean, all these different things. And just as much, they like the idea of something other than, the Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. And so we've found a high degree of enthusiasm. When I first started doing this, I expected to have to go out to these events and be out in the public and everything and talking to people and just get assaulted with the spoiler argument, right? Like you're splitting the vote. A vote for you is a vote for the Republicans, just as our libertarian friends get the same thing. A vote for you is a vote for the Democrats. You know, I mean, they get the same nonsense. And I can tell you that, again, so we went out and we collected 22,500 signatures in the springtime, talked to, I don't know how many thousands of people, right? Lots of people. And then this past few months, we've been out doing the same, out there talking to people and everything else. So I don't know how many people I've spoken to, a lot of people. I can count the number of conversations I've had, and I think it's 3, where people have brought up the splitting the vote, the spoil argument. It doesn't happen in the real world. People are concerned, again, about housing, healthcare. Their cousin just overdosed. You mean they're making $9 an hour, which is what they were making 20 years ago. I mean, like that kind of stuff. That's what they're concerned about. They live in a part of the state where, like, if your car breaks down, you're not going anywhere because there's no public transportation and no one's doing anything about it and will ever do anything about it in this state. That's the kind of stuff that you hear. The Rachel Maddow, oh my God, Jill Stein is ruining it for Hillary Clinton kind of nonsense is exactly that. And real people, normal people, whatever you want to call, like people who aren't mainlining, Rachel Maddow or Sean Hannity right into their brains, aren't talking about those things. They're talking about what affects them. So the problem, though, of course, with that is that we've got 7.3 million registered voters here in North Carolina. And so if we go out to an event and we talk to a few hundred people in a day, well, it's only a few hundred people. Right. I mean, so that's the biggest challenge for us. And I think for any independent or minor party or grassroots campaign is how do you get people to know about you? And then I think we're all familiar with the principles of marketing enough to like, but you gotta hear something between 5 and 15 times for it to sink in. Right. So that's why they run those commercials over and over and over again, right. To get you to drink, use Tide or drink Coke or whatever, right? I mean, that's the understanding of how we work as human beings and our perception and, our relationship to things. So that's what we really, run up against is this idea of how do we let people know? How do we get people to know that we are an option? How do we get people to know that there is someone out there who's running for Medicare for all, right? I mean, because as you would expect, if the first time someone sees your name is when they're marking up the ballot, they're probably not going to vote for you. You might get lucky and have somebody who's voted a protest vote, who hates the duopoly, who likes the idea of green, thinks my last name is funny, whatever it is, I mean, like, you might get a handful of those, but you're not going to get, right. That's not how you build a base. That's not how you build a party or bring people into your movement. So that's what we struggle with. And we've been trying to raise money so that we can advertise on Facebook and Instagram, advertise on YouTube, advertise. It's called OTT, which is over the top. I just learned what that is a couple months ago. So, but that's why I know what it means. But the idea is that, it's on streaming things. It's on people's phones, trying to get people to connect with. We're trying to connect with younger people, unaffiliated voters, disaffected voters. And of course, we're out there and we're talking to people, and a lot of people don't even know there's an election coming up, and it's the midterms. So turnout is low. I mean, like, you have all these things too that you're dealing with as well. People really aren't as engaged when it's not a presidential. I mean, so that's what every candidate and every party runs up against. But when you don't have like the resources we do, when we're just starting to build them here, when we're not starting to build, but building upon what's been done before and trying to put a foundation out. Yeah, that's what we do. We spend most of our time doing. And the idea is that we're going to be successful doing that and get a foundation down, and we start having county chapters, and we build it up from there. We have a network and we have an infrastructure, and it moves forward. And we're running 3 candidates this year. In 2024, we'll run 6 or 7 candidates. And in 2026, it's 10 and 12 or 12 candidates. And more importantly, I believe that we're getting people the experience to be campaign managers, to be treasurers, to be media people, what have you, all those important functions of a campaign that you have to have if you think if you're going to do this correctly, or not correctly, but if you're going to do this well.
Right. Real quick, we have a couple comments here. Ginny Lester. Hi, Ginny. She says, Illinois Green Party may be starting a green amendment movement after the November election. Very cool. And I want to say Sire. I'm not sure if you can correct me if I'm saying that wrong. I've been trying to get my family and friends to be open-minded towards third parties, especially towards the Green Party. Not many are on board, though. That is true. It's difficult to kind of loosen people. A lot of people, party affiliation is oftentimes like your religion. You don't necessarily choose it. I mean, it's an ongoing choice, but I mean, it's usually what your parents were or how you were brought up. Sometimes you'll see people move away from the religions and or their political parties to something else, but most of the time you'll probably pick what your parents were.
Right.
It's like your favorite sports team. Whatever dad liked is what I like.
That's why I'm a Mets fan. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it will never change.
And I'm a Chicago fan well, I lived in Portland, Oregon for a while, so I did convert from the Bulls to the Blazers, but that's about it.
Okay. I did the same too. I mean, I converted from the Rangers to the Canes for hockey, but I was never a big hockey fan. Like, baseball is my thing, but it's the identity and the idea that you're somehow going to get me to stop rooting for the Mets and root for the Phillies. It never happened. It'll never happen. I mean, you could pull every fingernail off my hand. I'm not rooting for the Phillies ever. You know what I mean? Because it's my identity. Exactly. And I think that's what we see here with this red-blue dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it is very difficult. It takes people to think outside the box, to think freely, if you will. Which doesn't mean to think other than how everybody else thinks. It means to more or less to think correctly when everybody else is thinking incorrectly. I kind of want to say it that way, because sometimes I'll see people not like a band because they're popular. Like, well, that's stupid. I mean, do you like their music? I mean, that kind of thing. Anyway, okay.
And it's funny you say that, because when I was a senior in college, the Dave Matthews Band came out.
Oh, baby.
And one of my friends was so obnoxious about Dave Matthews, about how great everything else, that I refused to like them. And I've never liked them. I've never even given it a moment's chance, just out of spite for my friend. This was 1995. So this was 27 years ago. I still won't give Dave Matthews the time of day, because my friend Sonny was so obnoxious about it. I've been vindicated with that, though, David, because Dave Matthews came to North Carolina and played a benefit concert for my opponent my Democratic opponent, Sherry Beasley. So I've been vindicated in my attitude towards Dave Matthews all these years.
That was kismet. I mean, that was just destined to happen. I will say that Dave Matthews is awesome, but okay, go on.
I'm sure he is. I mean, but again, it's getting to your point about identity and about it's not rational. It's not rational. It's not logical. It's irrational and it's illogical. And so exactly, I would probably love Dave Matthews. I would probably love that music because I mean that's kind of what I grew up around and everything else, and all the people who are like me like that music. Why wouldn't I? And everything else. But because I am a human being and I'm irrational and I prioritize my spite of my friend over my musical enjoyment, right? I have this thing for 27 years now against Dave Matthews, and I think it is. I mean, that's kind of an absurd example. But I think it does get to what Sire's talking about here about trying to crack open like that nut, right? To try and get into people and let them get people to think about something in a different way, to give something a chance, you know?
Right. Exactly. I mean, so but generally what we're speaking of is that emotions determine our conclusions and our identity more than reasoning does. And we are emotional beings, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, I do it, you do it, everybody does it. I mean, emotions are a wonderful part of the human experience. Absolutely. I just had lunch with a Illinois state representative, and I asked her about like when you're in the General Assembly, we were talking about ETO, ethylene oxide, and some of the pollutants, and how like one of the Republican representatives brought a banana up to the podium and said like, well, this produces ETO, so don't eat too many bananas. And that was like his argument. I'm like, that's stupid. That's dumb. That's called a straw man argument, which is a fallacy in reasoning. And then after I said that, I'm like, you know, I mean, I have a philosophy degree. I'm trained in logic. Logic is the branch of mathematics or philosophy that deals with argument specifically. There are formal structures to argumentation, and there are fallacies that are committed. Right. I'm like, does anybody ever follow those rules in the General Assembly? She said, no. I'm like, that's ridiculous. I mean, do you have any idea how offensive that is, that they get to just sort of like throw whatever bullshit around the General Assembly without knowing that they're actually committing a fallacy in reasoning, that you're not allowed to do that? I'm like, this is awful.
Well, this is what we run up against, right? So you and I could have this conversation, heavy in morality, heavy in philosophy, very much getting to the core of what we believe and why we do things. That's not how power is constructed and maintained, though.
That's true,
right? And that's a big problem I think we have on the left, is because we are tied to our principles. We do have values. We have moral understandings and constructs that guide us, right? We have our philosophies. We all of us on the left can tell you, you know, not that we're socialists, but what kind of socialists we are, right? You know, I mean, and so that is not really, though, how that's not at all how power is constructed, how power is consolidated, how power is maintained. And I think that's a real issue for us on the left, is understanding that our morality doesn't matter to people who are going to go up there and say, you don't have to worry about pollution because the same pollution you're talking about is found in this banana, right? Who are willing to go up there and just say something so idiotic, right? But they will do that. You know, I don't know if you've ever read The Once and Future King by T.H. White, about King Arthur. I think one of the best political books I've ever read. Absolutely fantastic book. There's a part, the Book of Merlin is kind of the epilogue to it, and I can't remember if it's in the Book of Merlin or at the end of the Once and Future King. But you know, Arthur is talking about trying to make peace, and this book comes out of World War II. It's all about the isms, and I mean, it is a fantastic book. I recommend it to anybody. And if you like the Arthur stories, it's all there as well. But you know what he says is like, Arthur doesn't say this, it's said to him. Okay, you have this, you have your thoughts, you have your philosophy, you have your beliefs, your values, your principles. What good is that when the brute you're telling that to is just going to crack you over the head and kill you?
Right.
Right. I mean, that's what we have to realize and remember, that we are up against people who have no compunction about lying. And as we're seeing now, they're not disaffected or put off by the idea of political violence. And it's something that we have to be very careful of and very cognizant of.
Yeah, no, that's very well said and very true. It reminds me of a quote by Derek Jensen of the Deep Green Resistance, who's been on the show before. Excuse me. And actually, he'll be on next week, where he says there's a war being waged on the natural world, and wars don't end by merely asking.
Right.
So,
right.
which is, I mean, we all know what he's saying there, which is unfortunate because it's all this stuff with climate change and pollution and the current political, economic status of not just America, but the world. You can see the collapse starting to happen. Food supply chains will be shut down, if not by climate change, which will happen too, guaranteed. If just localized economic systems or wherever else, we're already seeing some of this stuff just because some idiot wanted to invade another country that was none of his business.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. And people aren't going to just sit back and say, well, I'm sure the government will come and fix everything. Okay, things are going to happen and things are going to get nasty. And I'm not a violent person. I don't like it, but I'm not necessarily morally opposed to it either. If you got to do it, you got to eat, you got to eat. So anyway, give me a last comment or something, because we really just filled that hour went fast.
It did. This is terrific, David. I really appreciate it. I hope we could do it again. Yeah, no, if people can help us out. I mean, that's one of the things that we talk about in this campaign, though. So I know for a lot of Greens, it's important. Ranked choice voting, proportional representation, getting money out of politics, all those kinds of things are important to us. And I hear this from people on the internet. I said before, like in real life, I don't run into people with the spoiler argument or splitting the vote. On Twitter, you do. On the internet, you do. And Twitter is not real life, of course. But people will bring it up and they say, well, you should wait for ranked choice voting before you run as an independent or as a third party, so you don't spoil things. And just the response I have is, why wait? Why would the Democrats or Republicans who have a good thing, who have for decades deliberately manufactured a two-party system and utilized gerrymandering, utilizing ballot access, have hyperinflated the cost of politics so that you can't really do anything unless you have a ton of money, all these things that benefits them because, as we said earlier, they basically have everything kind of split between them. Why are they just going to give us ranked choice voting? They're not. And they'll never give us proportional representation until we make them see that it's needed, that they need it. And I mean, that's the idea with our campaign, other campaigns. Look, if you have this two-party system, if you have an electoral process that is meant for two parties, you have basically a first past the post, supposed to be 50+1, but you start running multiple candidates in it, it busts the system. It doesn't work. This carefully, deliberately constructed electoral system we have, when Democrats and Republicans start losing, because there's multiple candidates running in something they constructed for only two candidates, that's when they'll start adopting ranked choice voting. That's when they'll be open to proportional representation. And we see it here in North Carolina, organization called Better Ballot North Carolina. That's our ranked choice voting organization. But we also see it because other parties are coming. So we have 4 parties on the ballot in North Carolina now: the Democrats, Republicans, Greens, and Libertarians. And No Labels Party is coming in. They're about halfway through their petitioning process right now. Constitution Party is underway with their petitioning process. Andrew Yang's Forward Party is saying that they're going to get this done within the year here in North Carolina. I have no doubt that they won't. And then the People's Party is talking about doing something. I don't know if they will or not here, but so the potential that 2 years from now, there are going to be 7 or 8 parties on the ballot here in North Carolina. That completely upends your two-party system. That completely upends a lot of your gerrymandering, right? I mean, that takes away the manufactured structure that you have. It disrupts it. And so that's a lot of what we're doing here, is disrupt, so that it does cause change. Because, yeah, I mean, we could quote all kinds of folks, but of course, I think the one people are most familiar with, Frederick Douglass quote, right, where power concedes nothing without demand. And not only do you demand, you have to force it. And so, yeah, if people want to help us, support us out, you've been real kind, David. You've had the mattforsenate.org website up. certainly if you can contribute to our campaign, make a donation, that will help us get more people to realize that we are an option for them, that we want to be the party of working families. And, the more people we know, the more the movement grows, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So there's the website address right there. Go to it. Check it out. Very interesting narrative on there as well. Text. I was reading it before we started the show. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Real quick. One last question. Just give me a quick yes or no. And next time we have you on, we'll pick up from there. Are you getting any support from interest from the LGBTQ plus community in North Carolina?
Yes.
Cool. Good.
Yes.
I hope so. I want them all in the Green Party because
we went to a number of the events we did this year have been Pride events. And I think those have been that, as well as in the Black community, have been where we have clearly had the most support, where people are very enthusiastic for, I should also say in the Latino community as well, too. We find a great response. But yeah, in the LGBTQIA community, oh yeah, I mean it is very much, and we have I have a good amount of folks on my team that are a part of that community, and I think we all have friends and family who are, and so yeah, it's very important to us.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. All right, thank you so much, Matthew Hoh, Green Party candidate for senator in North Carolina. Best of everything to you. I'll be keeping an eye on for the next 7 days in a what is it? 7 days in a wake up.
In a wake up, yeah.
All right, cool. And next time you come on, we're going to need to talk more about your time in the military, because that was a huge part of your socio-political development, wasn't it?
It really was. It really was. And so, but thank you, David. And thanks everyone who watched this. I appreciate you guys tuning in for this.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Illinois Green Party series. I'm your host, David Rych. Tip of the hat to Robin Hood. Be good. Be green.